Hi, English 201. I have finally gotten through reading all of your brainstorming ideas about your paper. When you get that grade, make sure that you look for the comment because you have extensive kind of comments on what you said. And my goal was to kind of read everything you were thinking and try to help you guide that into okay, here's based on what you're interested in, here's what I think you can prove in your paper. And in some cases, I gave you a sample thesis or just the outline of a thesis. But that's where you need to move to next, everybody. This week, by Sunday night, you want to be really clear on the wording of your thesis, exactly what you're trying to prove, and then what claims you can make in all the body paragraphs to prove it. Have you got the right quotes to do that? So I just saw a lot of good thinking. The two big trends in the papers were people who wanted to talk about like race and animalization and wanted to use Othello and A Lesson Before Dying. That makes a ton of sense. Some people felt that put them at a disadvantage because we weren't finishing A Lesson Before Dying until right at the end, and they really needed to finish it to be able to write the paper. And that's true. It's one way to think about it. It will make a crush at the end for you. But another way to think of it is as you're reading the rest of the book, you're finding your quotes because you know exactly what it is kind of that you're reading for and that you need to be able to prove. So think of it that way. So that was one big trend. The other big trend was gender and wanting to use True Grit in a lesson, True Grit and Streetcar. And that made a lot of sense too. So some people wanted to prove hyper or toxic masculinity. Some people wanted to prove women standing up. Some people wanted to prove, look, there was a lot of like looking at like why Maddie could successfully stand up to the guys in her context, but Stella and Blanche really didn't have a lot of success with that. So those were the two trends. They both are great and make a lot of sense. There's a few outlier papers that I love even more, but just because they're different, they'll be the things that'll be different when I'm reading them. So I put together this little Google slide to talk about where we need to go next, okay? Because you're going to have one more assignment this week, and it will involve doing like you did last week, just doing some things on paper and let me see in them so I know where you are because we've only got 2 weeks. We've got to get this underway. All right, so your text. You've all got one play and one novel. One thing you can think about doing in your paper somewhere. Maybe if you find you come up a little short on length, this is something that'll fill in, or maybe you save it for your conclusion, or I don't know what. But I had you pick two different genres because I am curious about if there's anything that a play can do that a novel can't, or vice versa, in terms of what you're proving. In a play, kind of everyone's voice theoretically has equal authority. They're all just names and lines. To where in a novel, there's either an omniscient narrator that carries most of the authority, or one of the characters in the story has that role if it's first person, which actually is the case in both our novels. So what does it do to your argument, your point, what you're talking about, that either Maddie or Grant is kind of in control of telling us the story? How does that make it different than the play? How much does lacking the kind of description and narration of what's happening, what the setting looks like that you find in the novel, impact the play and what the play is able to do? So just something to think about. Somewhere in the paper, it would be nice if I see an awareness that they're different genres. Okay, your thesis. I say make it chunky because you have 5 pages to fill minimally. And so that means you want to prove more than one kind of little idea. You want to have chunks to your thesis. So this was a typical kind of thesis arrangement I suggested for people doing Othello and A Lesson Before Dying. Look at the different things you have to prove here. Despite being written hundreds of years apart, both Shakespeare's Othello and Gaynes' A Lesson Before Dying show the power of racism to make black men feel less than human and like they have to downplay their skills and successes. However, both texts ultimately what? So, a lot of things going on in here. You found a similarity in two texts that are different, first off, because they're two different genres. In some cases, like this one, because they're written a long time in between, and lots of different things. You know, Othello's written by a white man in London in the 16th century who may have never seen a black person, and A Lesson Before Dying is written by a black man. So, you know, just lots of differences. So you find a similarity in the text, and then here you're making the move to find the difference. And I don't want to say that, especially with you not having finished A Lesson Before Dying, but you know, what is the difference in the racial message here? Do they both have messages of just despair and there's no hope? Do they both have messages of hope, one and not the other? For some reason, do they provide lessons about what to do or not do as a response? So think about a thesis that's going to let you prove a lot of things so you can fill those 5 pages. Oops, I want to go back a second. Also, notice that a good thesis mentions both the authors and the titles of the text and italicizes the titles of the text. Okay, each body paragraph in your paper should start with a claim, a sentence. And that's what I started getting you thinking about last week. What claims do you think you can make? I'm going to have you do more of that this week. So these are good sentences that started paragraphs in my a different semester, last semester, I don't remember, the one before's papers on these texts. So one form of racism, animalization, is used heavily in the opening scenes of Othello. See how narrow and specific that is? It's getting down, it's making a claim, but it's making a claim about the beginning of the play. Gaynes also shows animalization at the start of his novel. Specific area, it's going to focus you on that opening chapter. Othello internalizes the animalization and othering when he starts speaking negatively of himself. So you have to find those lines where he's suggesting black is bad. Jefferson also internalizes the idea that he is no more than a hog. That's right in this week's reading. So the thing about these is they're not big, they're not generalized, they're not about the whole book. They're just trying to show a certain place and get you very narrow in proving a point. And if you have one of these after another in the paper, you'll find that you have 5 pages pretty easily. But the question will be, then once you get these, you figure out I have to prove all of these things to prove my thesis. Okay, what's the evidence for each one of them? Where am I looking for that? The evidence from your primary literary text, the 2 pieces you chose from class, you'll use a lot of that. And my reminders here are just we've been through all this before, but to introduce all your quotes and to cite after you quote. Okay, so examples. If you're doing your whole paper MLA style, here's the intro. While in prison, Jefferson says, here's the quote, I'm an old hog, they fattening up to kill. MLA just wants the page number. No P's, PG's, anything like that, just the page number, and then your period. APA wants the little P, period, and the page number, and then your final period. Okay? For a play like Othello with act, scenes, and lines, Iago tells Brabantio, comma, even now, that quote. Then we get the act, capital Roman numeral, the scene, lowercase Roman numeral, and the line numbers. So that'll be how you do Shakespeare, whether you're doing APA or MLA. For Streetcar, it isn't set up that way in scenes and line numbers, so you just use the page number, okay? If you happen to be in an online text that does not have page numbers, I'm going to be okay in this context with you just saying the chapter or the scene, but only in those situations. Okay, so that's a big bunch of what's going to fill up your paragraphs is this primary text quotes that prove what you're saying. But you also have the requirement to have 3 sources. So when you do evidence from your articles that you find in APA, you're going to introduce with the name of the author and the year. Smith 2017 argues that. Have your quote, then the little P period and the page number. Okay? For MLA, they don't care so much about the year, so just Smith argues that, and they don't want the little p, they just want the page number. So this is what else will be in your paragraphs, and not every paragraph. You don't have to be overly heavy quoting on these articles. You just want to show that you've referenced 3 different things and you're able to use some of that information in the paper. Sometimes you may not even quote it, you might paraphrase it. You still want to cite, so it's really clear where that information came from, but you don't always have to quote. Okay, so if you're just saying some historical information you found out about this, the time period of True Grit or something like that, you can put it in your own words. So here's a good paragraph, and I say that not because it's great and not because it's doing everything yours needs to do, but I wanted to use a TV show to say some important things about claim and evidence. Every body paragraph in your paper should start with a claim like this, okay? Here we have Schitt's Creek's comedy emerges from the contrast between the Roses and their current environment. That's a claim. Now, how much evidence can I throw in here about the difference between them and their current environment? For instance, Moira's wig collection barely fits on the limited walls of their motel room. If you know the show, you'll get images. In addition, see, I'm using transitions here. In addition, David's eclectic clothing choices seem out of place in the small town, and Alexis's need for entertainment leads her to find troublesome ways to have fun with others' feelings. The entire family's distaste for their environment might be reflected in Alexis's frequent comment of, "Ew, David." Okay? Now, I'm not quoting here because it's a TV show and that's kind of hard unless I'm watching it right while I'm doing this, but yours, this evidence will have quotes with it. So for your paragraph that might have 3 examples, it would be twice as long because each example would have a paragraph. Okay, gotta hurry. Gonna run out of my free time here. So think about that in building your paragraphs. Now, for Sunday night by 11:59, you'll see the assignment box in this week under the discussion board. You want to just turn in another Word document. You want to state your thesis really firmly. Okay, you're naming the text, you're naming the authors, you're making your claim. You're playing with what I suggested for you or doing your own thing, but it needs to be chunky, needs to be complex enough but clear. With that thesis in mind, then give me at least 5 sentences that make claims. These are the sentences you envision starting paragraphs with. Okay, so they obviously should be connected to this thesis, be the things you have to prove the thesis. Under each one of those sentences, if you could put a couple quotes, oh my God, you will be so happy when you sit down to write the paper that you have those right there. Go ahead and put them word for word, note the page number or accent line, whatever, so you can later just go into this document and pull it out and put it in your paper. But what are the quotes in the primary text that will help you prove that? And then just tell me a sentence or 2 about how your search for articles is going. I might throw in here a video about a reminder of how to look in the library database. Don't always just look for the title of the text, but some of you want to look for ideas or terms like hypermasculinity, toxic masculinity, things like that. But just a little bit more work this week, and then you'll be ready to write next week. Be in touch with any questions, obviously, or anything. And I look forward to reading these starting Monday morning.